This is the first background for our Creating America unit, and we're really going to emphasize this concept of the West. Now, we first look at how the West was settled. Now, by late 1783, the Peace of Paris is signed, and the British had evacuated from New York City, the largest city. Now, the nation consists of about 4 million people, and farming is the most common occupation. Now, the problem is that the good, or quote unquote good farmland, is viewed to have been taken up in the East. And with a growing population, Western lands looked more and more enticing. Now, the Confederation Congress, which is the Congress under the government known as the Articles of Confederation, eventually responded with two of their most lasting contributions. We have the Land Ordinance and the Northwest Ordinance. Now, the Land Ordinance was actually first proposed by Thomas Jefferson just before he left for France, and the idea was to survey the lands north of the Ohio River and immediately west of Pennsylvania to divide them into plots for easy resale. The lands would be divided into townships that were 36 square miles, and each square mile was subdivided into acreages for sale at about $2 an acre. Now, the goal is to provide land for settlement and allow the federal government to raise revenue, meaning they're going to get money coming in, although squatters are going to end up taking a lot of the good land. Now, this is followed up by the Northwest Ordinance, and the Northwest Ordinance is often viewed as the crowning achievement of the Confederation Congress. The borders of each potential state were carefully surveyed, and the law itself is going to provide quick steps for statehood. Now, before statehood is achieved, territorial status is provided, along with a governor and judges to enforce and administer laws. Once 5,000 adult men populated a territory, a legislature, meaning like a Congress for a territory, was to be established for the purpose of representative government. 60,000 residents meant that said territory could send men to write a state constitution, with statehood being the final step. Now, the map shows the states that, what you're looking at, shows the states that entered the Union under this law, all of them after the Articles of Confederation had been scrapped. The law also prohibited slavery in this territory, north of the Ohio River and east of the Mississippi River, which meant, theoretically, that all states that formed out of this territory would be forever closed to slavery. Now, when we take a look closer to home, Wisconsin, 1848. Our land survey began in 1832 and ended in 1866 in the Northwoods, which, take your pick on what constitutes the Northwoods. The first land offices were opened in Mineral Point, which is in southwest Wisconsin, and in Green Bay. So this is a law that definitely, we have a local connection to. So this is all about settlement, getting Eastern Americans to subsequently head west. Now, that begs the question, what about the indigenous inhabitants of the land? Now, the United States claimed ownership of the land based on treaties that were signed in the mid-1780s, but the nations living in the Northwest considered the land to be theirs. Now, one of those treaties was the 1784 Treaty of Fort Stanwix, and there's another Treaty of Fort Stanwix that was signed in 1768 that moved the proclamation line, in case you look it up. So this one is 1784. The new one not only redrew the boundary line from 1768, but actually created the first, what we would call, reservation in the United States for the Haudenosaunee. Now, this new treaty was never actually ratified by the Haudenosaunee, who continued to lose land despite their support of the Continentals in the Revolution, because keep in mind the Oneida and the Tuscarora both backed the Americans, and yet land loss is going to continue. Now, Henry Knox, who you see on screen, he's the Secretary of War. He had initially insisted that the United States respect indigenous land rights, and this appeared to potentially be the case when the Confederation government sought to negotiate with each nation to establish clear boundaries. But it's going to become clear over time that the United States felt as though these were mere leases, not statements of indigenous ownership. Lease meaning the land is being rented by these indigenous nations. In 1786, the United States is going to return to what they call the so-called right of conquest ideology, when American representatives explain that this country belongs to the United States and will protect it. That's the wording of American representatives. This ideology maintained that since the United States had, won the land during the Revolution, and it was ceded in a treaty with their English adversaries, then it belonged to this new nation by rights. Now, there were even reports of nations and tribes in the Northwest Territories who were preparing for military action. And even in the southern United States, resistance began to build towards American settlement on indigenous lands, specifically among the Creek Nation.